Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's a solo review I was not planning on. The newest project from Bastille, Give Me the Future. So again, not planning on making this a solo review, but I think it's fair to say that I was planning for nothing with this album. And I mean, can you blame me? What else could I expect anything from Bastille in 2022? After a few promising moments on their debut project, and a couple songs that I like, even if I think they've aged in weird ways, Bastille's had all the self-serious importance of an act with higher conceptual ambitions, but so little in the execution to actually back it up, which has mostly led to their albums being kind of sloppily produced and really kind of tedious. More often I forget them than outright dislike them. Unsurprisingly, those opinions mean that my reviews have not been all that popular. I kind of get why, too. I mean, Bastille's got a mostly unique sound, a lot of earnestness, writing that at least seems to glance at higher concepts makes you feel smart, and that can be enough to pull in the silent majority audience. Hell, that's how they initially won me over. That plus Pompeii is really good. But the deeper I've gone into their catalog, especially their follow-up projects after Bad Blood in 2016 and 2019, well, the less I've been impressed with them, with the production feeling increasingly colorless and generic, and the writing never grasping the nuances of framing and subtext that could take them to a more interesting, transgressive, or deeper place. The better word, and I'm loath to use it unless I actually mean it, it's pretentious, implying a lot more depth than they can credibly back up. But you know what, to their credit, Bastille have never felt disingenuous or coming from a snobbish or bad place. They're clearly trying, and that means their material's more dull than outright aggravating for me. And yes, that's exactly what I was gonna expect with Give Me the Future, just Bastille sinking further into the quagmire of commercial core devoured by the Imagine Dragon, where they might have some lofty thematic statements but little in the sound to really support it. I mean, come on. Their last recognizable big hit stateside, it was Happier with Marshmello. If you want a way to guarantee my expectations are rock bottom, that's it. To the point I was prepared to put this on the pulse, call it a day, move on, save myself the grief, and yet I don't think I could have predicted this. Yeah, folks, there's a reason I'm reviewing this solo. This is something special. The sort of disaster that's actually kind of fun to talk about, where I'm not even mad that I'm reviewing it. A project somewhere in between Muse's Simulation Theory, the 1975's A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships, maybe a dash of Billy Idol's long-forgotten disaster of an album from the early 90s, Cyberpunk. The sort of sci-fi splatter painting where you might grasp on the surface the quasi-dystopian exploration that Bastille's trying, but in the end, the result just can't help you have me laughing hysterically, or at least at first I untangled it further and realized not only did I have way too much to say, hence the review, but also that this album tested my patience in ways I did not expect, so yeah, strap in, it's gonna be a long one. And what I found kind of fascinating at first is that this had potential. Once again, Bastille kept their production crew in-house. They've had conceptual experiments like this before, and Bastille's always been a deeply uncool and profoundly earnest band, or at least that was the emotional through line that Dan Smith can best sell, so you know what? A sci-fi dystopian epic, it's in their wheelhouse, or at least not that far afield. And you can tell Dan Smith is really trying his hardest with this. Yeah, the vocoders are a new-ish addition, but not a bad one. Given that I've always found Dan Smith can be a little limited as an expressive and emotive singer, I don't mind him adding effects to amplify his personality, especially if he keeps the rich well of backing vocals behind him, which are always the best part of any Bastille album. But there's three major problems that characterize Give Me the Future, and the first being is that I'm just not sure there's enough even here to earn the qualifier of epic. This album's barely over a half hour, the shortest Bastille album to date, and 3 of the 13 songs are interludes, creating more the impression of pop songs drenched in sci-fi iconography rather than creating a cohesive narrative. And that's not counting songs like Thelma and Louise, or Shut Off the Lights, or Club 57 that fly off on wild tangents that only barely connect to any themes here, to say nothing of their overall production and sound. But before we get to that, let's talk about the writing. And you know, I'll give Bastille this. On the surface, the themes aren't bad, creating an escapist, quasi-VR concept called Futurescape that uses modern flashy tech branding and might be virtual reality, but also have some elements of mind control as well. Okay, seeds of something here, especially if you want to comment on how algorithms can help shape human behavior, or how technocrats operate under late capitalism. There's a lot of very relevant topics there. And hell, you got plenty of runway if you want to tell a dystopian story. Look outside. But you know, ever since the beginning, Bastille's had this issue of throwing a lot of words and references into a song and hoping that the vague idea will materialize out of it. And where on previous projects it felt needlessly obtuse or just undercooked, here it's hard to escape how the pileup of references seem more for their own sake rather than feeding into any larger connective tissue or synergy within the song. The whole Ready Player One influence is kind of flagrant in more ways than one. That's not a good thing. And you know what, here goes right past incoherent and kind of right into hilarious. Made all the funnier because Dan Smith is selling it as if he's not aware of how kind of stupid it's all becoming. For example, putting another tenuous reference to another brick in the wall in a song called Thelma and Louise, it barely makes any sense, and the implied gender politics of all that makes my head spin. And the pile up of half-formed dystopian references on Back to the Future, where the message seems closer to leaving within this futuristic dream world's fucking rad. Who cares about any of the political implications of referencing 1984, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and especially Blade Runner in the stupidest way possible? And then again, that's later echoed on Stay Awake with the bizarre Total Recall reference, or the title track with its out-of-context Philip K. Dick reference. Dreaming of Electric Sheep, it's a reference to the questions of empathy and holding a mirror to the human experience, questioning whether or not we're diminished in contrast of technology, which doesn't really work on a song centered around the ravenous desire for more, even if you know it's all fake. Which in the context of the album, that's been just dandy. And it gets amplified to a frankly absurd degree on Plug In, where even if there's some fragments of existential dread with the deepfakes and the shallow celebrity obsessions, and the references to old white billionaires wanting to go to Mars, I'm sorry, it kind of plays second fiddle to Dan Smith singing about being in bed with and seemingly want to fuck a robot. I'm serious! So once again, the framing makes a Bastille album thematically incoherent. What else is new? But worse still might be the thematic payoff. Because there's nothing inherently wrong with emotional escapism, going off into cyberspace or virtual reality, and maybe even the creeping feeling that it's not truly satisfying. But ending it with a song where the through line is, well, who cares what the dystopian future holds, I have you, it just feels painfully off in a bewildering way. Not only does it completely mishandle all the sci-fi subtext, which doesn't go nearly as examined as it should, the arc of finding real connection doesn't quite fit with the intended futurism, unless he's talking about the fucking robot. If I'm gonna be generous here, it maybe pays off what Riz Ahmed provides on that mostly embarrassing spoken word interlude on Promises. Using the word gonads as a central point of rhyming had me burst out laughing every single time. This is where your clunky poetry kills your atmosphere in the same way the Blade Run line did on Back to the Future. But more to the point, it feels just incredibly trite to say we're not denying all the horrible things around us that we're trying to escape. To quote Ahmed again, we're neither evil nor ostrich. I mean, it's not like we can change the future anyway in this whole dystopia, but it's more that we care about this undercooked connection that we've been gesturing vaguely at the entire album. And you know, this is a running theme of which I just can't stand with a lot of records that touch on dystopian themes. Lana Del Rey's Lust for Life, some of the subtext there springs to mind. But the bigger problem is that the emotional payoff here doesn't match the larger arc of the album. The individualist but generally undercooked dystopian escapism then leading to a communal, well, I'll get over all those vaguely defined dystopian nightmares I'm trying to escape so long as I have you. It doesn't really pay off outside the songs that barely fit with the sci-fi theme anyway. Thelma and Louise kinda goes for the feminist sisterhood connection. Doesn't remotely match the tone or vibe of the movie, but different conversation. And I guess Shut Off the Lights and Club 57 go for the generic find love or attention on the dance floor thing. But these moments feel both stylistically and emotionally in their own space outside of the whole sci-fi concept. So ending the project trying to resolve them primarily instead, it feels like a complete misstep, albeit not a surprising one, because paying off the dystopian side properly would involve engaging with the actual text and the politics, and that's way more revolutionary than Bastille will ever want to be, despite the band name, especially as they want us to join them in the metaverse. Yeah, that's a partnership that actually exists, and given this album, makes a depressing amount of sense. Given how often you reference dystopias, of course you're gonna team up with Facebook. Just dandy. But fine, what about the music? If the songs are good, that's gonna help, right? Well, I'll give Bastille this. It's probably their most eclectic project to date in terms of slamming together synthpop, 80s new wave, vocoders, ornate strings passages, a shocking amount of dated, blown-out Kanye Westisms from the late 2000s into their regular bombast. And you know, that does help a few choruses stand out a little bit more. I can at least remember a few more hooks here, and I haven't said that about a Bastille album in a long-ass time. But this is also where the abbreviated nature of a lot of these songs and the album's shockingly short runtime makes me think that all that cinematic bombast that they're cramming into a few songs isn't really making the most of that opportunity. But what surprised me a lot more is how apparently Dan Smith and the rest of his producers learned none of that lessons that are in that era of Kanye West production. Why is the percussion so clunky and the vocoder passages damn near clipping the front of the mix that feels mastered for volume rather than any sense of dynamic range? Why have such heavy programmed percussion if you're not going to use the full mix to give the sound the proper impact? Especially when you try to match it with a fat bass line on Thelma and Louise that has a lot less groove than you would otherwise expect, or the flailing but somewhat stiff attempt at the closing track Gospel with the future holds with the god-awful guitar and the synth tones. Why do all the hand claps sound so painfully fake? Why do all the strings passages sound, paradoxically, so clear and elegant with all that proper space that you're not affording to the rest of the instruments? Where the clash just becomes painfully obvious on songs like Plug In with such a swampy low end. Then, why are you going for the bouncy Paul Simon's Graceland homage on Shut Off the Lights that sounds imported right out of the late 80s and again, winds up easily one of the most fun moments on the entire album? Well, okay, I guess that question answered itself, but then again, why don't you double down on it? You know it kind of worked. Why instead brick out every melodic guitar and synth tone on Stay Awake? Or go for the sort of overcompressed clunker that you hear on an Imagine Dragons album with the title track? Actually, here's the big question. Why is this album compressed like it's a casualty of the loudness war from the mid-2000s? You would think, for an album that's trying to sound so cinematic and big and high concept and epic, you would go for broke with the production. You would make it feel huge. Hell, maybe even go for broke in the compositions. I mean, I guess shorter song structures might be prioritizing immediacy going pop, but wow, if there was a place and time and an opportunity to go for broke, isn't it here? But you know, there was a part of me that the first 3 or 4 times I heard this, I mean, it's bad, but it was funny. The writing went right into parody. This could be the sort of project you throw on for a laugh. Hell, you know what? There are probably critics who will buy into the shallow escapist fun of it all. I would get it. But the more listens I gave this, the less funny and the less fun it was. Be it the god-awful production, the thematic incoherence, the pretentiousness to make some vague gestures at half-formed dystopian concepts, and then completely chicken out when it comes to landing it with any sort of revolutionary message. Again, look at your band name. And then the whole bombast and earnestness began just losing its flavor, and that's what drew me in. I mean, it's pretty much a disaster, but it's a compromised one that doesn't even have the stones to embrace the excess and cheese of it all, because that might actually push away those corporate connections who will get antsy if they get called out. And that in reality just makes it so much worse. I'd say listen to it if you want to laugh, but honestly, folks, we can all do so much better at this point. Let's not be given the future. Let's take it for ourselves. Let's leave Bastille behind. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be extremely grateful. I'll admit this review might be contentious. All of my Bastille reviews have been, but then again, this album's kind of a mess, so I'm not sure a lot of people can really debate parts of this. Again, it's trying for high concept, but man, it does not work. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys have comments about that, leave them down there below. I'm sure this album might inspire some debate for those people who have heard it. But hey, if you want to argue with me more directly, and along the way support the channel, or maybe get albums onto my schedule going forward, because again, this was being prepped for On the Pulse, not a solo review, well, link to my Patreon is right over there. Once again, don't feel obligated, but if you want to, go ahead. Also, if you want to, my link to my merch is down in the description below. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.